Hi, Kristen. Good to see you. Hi, Sharon. How are you? Hello, Rob. Dana, good to see you. Lamar, good to see you. Haven't talked to Lamar for a while. It's good to see us all together. Um, yeah, Nicole just joined us. Welcome, Nicole. Okay, well, we've got a lot to talk about. Mike, lay out our agenda today. We've got, I think you did a really good job of kind of giving us four different talking points. Also was in your email. So for those who may have missed the email, what's our agenda today, Mike?
Well, we're gonna touch on the resolution of due diligence addendum and talk about underwriting. How some of these repairs that we're requesting may be affected by underwriting and how we can handle those situations. We're also going to touch on a subject that we discussed very briefly, and at the end of the huddle a few huddles ago, the FHA VA loan addendum, and provide some clarification on when a buyer is actually able to retain their earnest money in those situations. We're also going to touch on 10 ways to thrive in 2025. That rhymes on purpose. And as in and special requests, we're going to talk about open houses, sub agencies, and that is sent in by Linda Larson. So we're going to touch on that today as well.
Man, that sounds really exciting.
Oh, I mean, excitement doesn't begin to describe what I just said. Doesn't begin to describe it. So,
Gosh, I know my daughters are always like, "Dad, you really like all this contract law stuff?" And I said, "Yeah, I really do, actually. Really, really good stuff." You want to go? What order do you want to go in, Mike?
well, let's start with the resolution of due diligence addendum. I mean, it's just that's also. I mean, excitement levels are off the charts. Will with resolution of due diligence
Okay.
addendum.
Hey Dana, do you mind? Can you jump in to have some dialogue with us from a mortgage perspective on this? Unmute. You said yes.
Okay, I'm like, let me unmute just a sec.
Why not
Yeah,
just remind everybody the problems that you guys see from your perspective when we see a lot of repairs in a Rev C? What does an underwriter do when they see repairs in the contract?
it's always so fun. Um, so it really depends on the underwriter, but if it's anything that affects like the structure, safety, or things like sellability of the home, it can be something that they're going to require to be done prior to the loan closing because they want to make sure that the loan, like the clients aren't going to move in and have a home that's not habitable. Um, if they're simple minor things, sometimes they don't even ask for updates on them. If it's something major and is going to be super cost effective, we're going to want to see typically that it's done. Um, a lot of times, escrow holdback is a thing, but it's not easy. It's kind of a pain in the butt, to be honest. So, but they will let you do escrow holdback for a weather permitting thing sometimes too. But every thing that you guys have on the addendum, it really just depends on what it is exactly. Because I've seen one underwriter be fine with something and one underwriter not. So it's as clear as mud about the direction I can really give you on things like that. But if you guys ever have questions, just call us and see, because I can usually reach out to an underwriter to see what their opinion of it will be.
Nice. Uh,
Um,
let's.
real quick, Will. This is a real world example that happened last week, and I think this is pretty common. And for this situation, we're going to use an item that's costs a lot of money, and people don't have the cash, but they do have the equity to pay for this repair. And we'll call it a roof, or we'll call it a new furnace, or HVAC unit, whatever, what have you. It's several $1,000s. The seller doesn't have it, but they can certainly pay for it with their equity in their home upon the sale. And everybody wants to, everybody in this instance agreed, hey, we'll contribute to that. We'll pay an invoice at closing. Or how would you prefer or recommend we handle something like that? Dana.
So we've got a roof, huh? It's a lot. The buyer doesn't have additional funds. The seller has no funds, or they have the ability. What? How?
Well, in this instance, the seller had the money, right? The seller is willing to pay for a new roof, and I think it was like $23,000. And the question, we represented the seller in this instance, so we're really prepared to do just about anything we want. But the buyer's agent suggested a few things that were probably not appropriate. But we were looking for, in this situation, we were looking for the loan officer and the underwriter's direction on how to handle such a thing.
Did they, I'm sorry, did they put it in addendum? Did they say seller agrees to repair the roof?
Well, that was proposed, and my advice was let's not do anything until the loan officer gives us direction on this.
Okay.
Because,
All right.
yeah.
So, typically for something like that, it's going to require 1.5 times if it's not done until after closing. And it's technically the servicer who can determine the amount. So they could even go up. I've seen a servicer do 2.5 times. Now it's been like 8 years since they required that much. But it's typically 1.5 times the amount of whatever is quoted. So say it's 10,000, they're going to want to hold back 15,000 if it's not going to be done until after closing.
Okay.
Sorry, my son's here with me today.
That's all right. So, so you're saying that in this instance, we can put it on an addenda and we can say that, hey, we're going to do an escrow holdback of 15,000 in this example for roof repairs, and that's okay.
Yes, if it's planning on being done after. Now, if it's you guys are like, oh yeah, they'll take care of it before closing. If the people had the money and we're just going to replace it, then we would just want proof that it was done if it's in the addendum. We don't really care. But if it's going to be something that they don't have the money and so they're going to wait until after closing to do it, the lender or investor is going to want to see that they have 1.5 times the amount of the quote. And then once it's finalized, they'll reimburse the party who held back the 1.5%. But they just want to make sure that there's enough to cover the entire amount of the actual repair.
Okay. Great question by Kristen. Is there an addendum specific to escrow holdback? What say you, Will Cooper?
Yeah, there actually is. We created this internally. There's a custom addendum that we created. It's been a while. I want to say it's probably been 6 or 7 years since we created that, but we do have one. Yes, Kristen, it's in our internal forms. A couple of thoughts I want to add to this. First, let me start from the seller side. The buyer did their due diligence and counters back with, "I want a whole new roof." My, I think where my head goes is, I'm willing or I'm able to do the new roof. I want my earnest money to be non-refundable and potentially even released. So that might also offset some of the cash burden that the seller has. So you might want to think about buyer agrees to release, the earnest money to the seller. There's also a date in which the roof may be done. Whether we have to extend something or not, I think the buyer would likely want that done prior to walkthrough inspection, which you can always put a date to. This is one of those weird things about the rep C is that we have it so many days prior, but it doesn't have a date. There is not a walkthrough date. Like the walkthrough will be conducted on this day. So if you wanted to solidify that, maybe that's some of the negotiation points on this roof is seller agrees to repair the roof. We probably want some detail about what that is. Here's the contractor. Here's the kind of shingle or what kind of roofing we're going to use. Is it a full tear off? Is it a layover? I mean, look, there's a general rule of thumb when it comes to all repairs. If we can avoid seller doing repairs, we're going to avoid a lot of headaches and problems. We could add some money to this is back to look, actually, let me hold off on that for a second as we go to resolution due diligence. So if the seller's going to do it prior to, we don't need the escrow holdback. We're negotiating this inside the rep seat. That's okay because it's done prior to. Right, Dana? You have no problem with the underwriting as long as the roof is done prior to closing. And we just want evidence it's completed.
Yeah, they would just want the evidence it's completed and that's it. They don't care even where the money comes in. It's not like we're sourcing anything like that. They just want to know that per the contract, everything got completed as the contract states.
Right. Yeah. So we want to stay away from having negotiations of particular details inside the rep C from addendum to addendum to addendum. That's the problem that Dana was talking about with underwriting, which is why we have the resolution to due diligence. And we hope to simplify all those resolutions down to three options. And we don't want seller doing repairs. So that's what we kind of hope the outcome is. If the seller is going to do repairs prior to any repair, whether it's roof or not, I would suggest creating a deadline for that so that it can be re-inspected. And also, I would suggest that earnest money be released and potentially, well, non-refundable and released. Anytime the seller is going to do customizations or repairs for a buyer on a home, we should consider what's going on with the earnest money.
Love that suggestion. Comment in the chat. Kristen says, I also recommend including your verbiage that a transferable warranty must be included by the contractor if work is to be done before closing.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, really good catch. Excellent perspective and addition. Good buyer agent would ask for that. I think most of that stuff is transferable, but yes, it's really good to get that and have the contractor commit to that. You might also get into the details of what contractor had the buyer approve the contractor. That's what kind of roof, all that stuff I mentioned before. So if it's not transferable, why are we using this guy? So yeah, some red flags there. Do you want to pull up the resolution really quick and let's just review? I thought, Mike and I were talking before, guys, is kind of getting ready for this, not just from, say we're going to teach in Huddle today what the resolution is, but rather look at the resolution of due diligence as a way to, as a tool to use in your buyer presentations and also in your seller presentation. So your marketing and listing presentation. And what kind of questions might lead us here? Already we had, well, what happens if I have to repair this roof? What forms do we use in our presentation? And resolution due diligence is a very simple way to answer in a structure of how we deal with due diligence issues and what we'd prefer to have happen. We can free up cash for the buyer by having the closing costs be contributed by the seller, which frees cash for repairs for buyer. But you have to explain that, right? We could lower the price of the property. If a buyer's paying cash, number one and number two essentially do the same thing by freeing up cash for repairs, but now the buyer takes on the obligation, right? If we're only lowering price and the buyer gets a loan, it doesn't do much for the buyer's bank account to fund the cash for repairs, which does unfortunately lead us to a seller doing repairs. And this can be problematic because when sellers do repairs, they're not as motivated as the buyer is, clearly. So we want to avoid that. And we don't have a lot of repairs done by seller, fortunately. I think everyone gets that message. But have you thought about how you're using this form in a presentation style? So think about that. When you're getting a question, see if you can pull the form into to give you a structure of the conversation. Anything else on that one, Mike?
No, I think it is if you walk through a house that has some very obvious needs of repairs and you kind of anticipate this before you list it, this is just like Will says, remember this is a good tool to use to help explain to the seller, this is how we're going to potentially solve some of these problems. This is how we're going to work through those. So,
yeah, I've heard too, not having a second negotiation. If I put my listing hat on, we don't want to have another negotiation. We've already negotiated once to go under contract. We prefer not to have another negotiation. So how do we avoid that? There may be cases where we do inspections prior to going active. So we already know what the repairs are. We already know, we've already addressed some of this. We've already fixed these things. So they're very, minimal. It can drive a higher price. But the reality is due diligence is an opportunity for a buyer to reopen negotiations. And this is likely going to be where we see that, a new request, either price, cost, or repairs. So it sets an expectation for a seller. I think it's appropriate. I've been preaching a lot about showing complexity and problem so that you can deliver solution and create value. No question about it. They've never seen this form. Never seen it. And it's complicated to them. You're going to have to simplify it and walk them through it. So I like the 1, 2, 3. See, One, two, three. How do we resolve inspections? One, two, three. It's a really great way to teach from. So maybe if you're looking at, I hope that you're looking at the forms through a different light always as a presentation tool, but certainly resolution and due diligence is already laid out in a very elementary way on how we overcome objections to inspections.
Love it.
May I ask a question?
Please do.
Are we advocating now to get a pre-inspection? Because that's always been the question. Do you get a pre-inspection or not?
Well, we as a company advocate, like as a blanket statement, no. I think
Maybe not as a company, but would you recommend to us to recommend that to our sellers to get an inspection done before we put it on market?
well, the only if you guys if we want to debate this openly, what's the downside to a seller doing an inspection prior to going active, other than the cost of the inspection? What's the downside?
Repairing things a buyer may not ask
Pointing
for.
out issues that they really don't want to resolve, but now they know of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. And before we go down, go ahead and give me more because I've got an answer for that one from a legal perspective. I think you might find interesting.
Yeah, I
So,
think
go
those
ahead.
are all summed up with disclosures, right? So, I mean, we're talking about disclosure issues. I didn't hear what Rob said though.
I just said repairing items that a buyer may not ask a seller to repair for. So they in essence fixed things that they may not have to fix.
Yeah. They may, if it's a remodel, if it's a, any kind of uh, change to the property, we may not be getting our money back out of it because we did something a buyer didn't want to have done. I mean, they were going to, they're going to rip that out anyway, kind of a thing. So I think that is a legitimate one that can be added to the. This is what we get with our fixer uppers, right? Or the older properties. Are we going to repair or spend money on something that a buyer may not see value in, and it won't drive our equity up? That's a great question. There's not always, and every house is different. So, and every situation is different. So I think it really does depend on the situation as to whether or not we advise that. So can I talk about a legal perspective on, okay, on discovering things about the property? If a seller fills out a seller's disclosure without the inspection and misses things because they did not know, although they're not guilty of overt fraud or clear fraud, they're still liable for the things they should have known. And I think that the inspection does give some evidence to protect the seller that they hired a third-party professional to gather information about the property, and the things that they should know were then brought to their attention. That they otherwise would have marked the box, I don't know, and instead now they're informed. I think we just need to remind ourselves that just because a seller doesn't know of a defect, it doesn't automatically remove the liability of that knowledge. There's a lot of times where the legal avenue or angle is that they should have known, and what that's called is constructive fraud. It's a determination that you should have known the condition of the issue because a reasonable person would have. You could testify that you didn't know and be truthful, even evidence to support you didn't know, but that doesn't completely remove you from the liability. So maybe another reason to have an inspection, that I'd slide that over to the reason to get one. The reasons to not get one is the cost of the inspection and then the cost to repair things a buyer may not want. But the reasons to get one, it certainly does have an effect of lowering legal liability.
Yeah, I think, and I think there's some middle ground too here. Maybe we don't need to order a full scale inspection. I mean, maybe we just need to, hire some professionals to come in and give us opinions on things that a prudent buyer is going to discover anyway. That's a different issue. If your furnace is acting up, maybe you want to get that resolved before you put it on the market and deal with it during due diligence, kind of a thing.
Good stuff. Okay. Anything else on this one? No? All right. What's next on the list, Mike?
All right, let's talk about the um, is Tara here? She's the one that asked the question. So we're gonna do this for her, even though she's not here. The question she asked the question as we were signing off a couple huddles ago because she had a listing and um, the buyer's agent had I think it was an FHA loan going on. Actually, I think it was a VA loan, and they had proposed depositing additional earnest money to extend finance and appraisal deadline, and it kind of confused her because her perception was, well, they kind of get a pass on that in some respects, and it's sort of true, not necessarily true. So I'm going to read paragraph 3, and if you can't see it, this is the FHA VA loan addendum, and really what everybody is always confused about, it seems, is paragraph 3. So we're going to read this. Notwithstanding the finance and appraisal deadline, buyer shall not be obligated to complete the purchase of the property or incur any penalty of forfeiture of the earnest money deposit or other down payment, or otherwise be obligated to purchase the property if A, for a VA loan, the purchase price exceeds the reasonable value of the property established by the VA Certificate of Reasonable Value or VA appraisal, or B, for an FHA loan, the purchase price exceeds the appraised value of the property, excluding closing costs, established by the FHA appraisal. Buyer shall, however, have the right to complete the sale without regard to the amount of the appraised valuation made by the applicable FHA or the VA. The appraised valuation is used to determine the maximum loan that the FHA will insure or VA will guarantee. Neither FHA nor the VA warrants the value of the condition of the property. Buyers should satisfy themselves for the price and condition of the property are acceptable. Buyer acknowledges that an FHA or VA appraisal does not constitute a property inspection. Seller agrees to cooperate and sign any lender required documentation, blah, blah, blah. All right, so there you have it. The bottom line is the only out they have is if this does not appraise. They are not going to lose their earnest money if the property does not appraise. That's it. And I think, it sort of begs the question, well, what if it's after the finance and appraisal deadline? If they receive their appraisal after the finance and appraisal deadline, Will, what say you? My answer is they get their earnest money back if it doesn't appraise.
Well, because addendum language comes after Rep C, then we lean on this. Okay. So, just addendum language is more powerful. And I'm looking at 8.2 of the Rep C, and we all understand that if you cancel based on financing and appraisal after, well, we remind everyone in the mandatory class we just did with Rob that if you're going to cancel an appraisal, you have to provide a copy of the appraisal. So if the buyer is saying, I want my earnest money returned to me based on a financing appraisal, I have to have a copy of it. And I have to do it before the deadline. Well, the FHA addendum says you cannot lose your money. And it is modifying essentially 8.2. I mean, don't we wish it said, this modifies 8.2 so we're clear? And I think that's why we get our wires crossed, because 8.2 says one thing. If it's after, it goes to seller. If it's prior, it goes to buyer. And yet the VA addendum and FHA addendum says something differently.
Yep.
But it's an addendum and it does modify it. So we follow the language of the FHA addendum. There's another angle on this. I'll wait though, but anything else?
I would add that if you are a listing agent and a buyer's agent says, hey, yeah, but we have the FHA VA addendum, we can cancel because of this. Your response should be, yes, you can, once you show me that it didn't appraise. That should be your response. IMO. Let's say you will.
Because the VA and FHA addendum doesn't necessarily say that, 8.2 does. If an addendum doesn't modify the base of the contract, I could see how we could land on, you've got to give me a copy of it. But the VA and FHA addendum doesn't say in order to have the buyer be able to collect the earnest money or be protected, they must provide a copy of the appraisal. We might have a little bit of ambiguity there, but an unmodified language of the Rep C stays. So to your point, Mike, I'd rather be on your side on that one, Mike. If we don't have language that clarifies it, I'd rather have that because it's unmodified, and unmodified language stays.
Yeah,
That's what I
I
say.
yeah,
But
and I think I also think it's a reasonable request if they're sort of after the finance and appraisal deadline, they're making claims that the FHA VA addendum protects them. It seems like a reasonable request to say it sure does as long as the property didn't appraise. So
yeah,
anyway,
yeah. Can I turn the channel a little bit? You ready for just a little different angle on this one?
please do.
I thought this is where we might end up. I've heard this debated a lot. So, is this addendum federal law or some kind of rule that all lenders have to follow or all buyers have to follow? Why am I asking that question? Well, because if it is a law, then you can't modify it. You can't ever contract around the law. You can have two parties agree to something, but if it's not in balance with the law, you can't enforce it, right? Everyone understands that, I think, fundamentally. Is this one of those cases? Why am I asking that? Let's say you're a listing agent and you get an FHA offer and you're like, wait a minute, these guys can draw this thing out, get a low appraisal, and we have to give their earnest money back. I've got competing offers. I'm not happy with these terms. Buyer agents says, hey, pick our offer, pick our offer. He's like, yeah, but your terms are weak. Okay. So what are you concerned about? I'm concerned about this appraisal thing. And I got competing offers and sales prices are climbing. So that's pretty likely, right? You get an FHA offer and you've got competing offers. FHA offer is weaker, isn't it? Of course it is. It's because of this language. So here's the question. If it's a law, you can't modify it. If it's not a law, you can counter it. What do you think?
I've always assumed that it's underwriting to insure these loans.
Okay, so maybe it's just
Underwriting
a
requirement.
policy, and the underwriters are like, hey, I have to have the VA FHA addendum to even proceed it with the loan process. So this is where all the spaghetti bowl is underwriter's perspective. I need this addendum. We've got a seller agent who's driving the price up. There's competing offers. We have a buyer agent representing this FHA buyer who doesn't want to miss out because of the FHA language. You see the problem? What do you think?
I think your question is, can we addenda our way around this problem?
Yeah, could we? What do you think? Can you go in there and say in regards to the FHA addendum, and change the
I
earnest?
think I'm going to give you a call. I think that's what I would do. I think I'm going to give you a call
Yeah,
in
Good
that
answer.
situation and just make
Excellent
sure.
answer.
yeah, yeah. Lance, you gotta weigh in on this one.
Yeah, to my knowledge, the answer is it's a federal law, cannot be waived around. And the reality is that if you disputed it, you'd most likely end up in a lawsuit anyway. It's the same reason why builders really discriminate against a VA FHA loan product. I've seen more homes. I've done more transactions with a VA loan. It's a great loan program, right? It's one of the best loans out there. But I've done more transactions on homes over $1 million for VA purchases in the last 3 years than probably the previous 25 years before that. But how many builders want to build $1 million custom home for somebody on a VA loan where their construction deposit? I mean, it does not talk about construction deposit. It doesn't delineate the difference between earnest money and construction deposit. I think that's where the lawsuit would get a little sticky. But I think that's why builders go, yeah, I don't even want to deal with it. Or I should say, if you do have a client looking to buy a new home that's not a spec, that's a build job from the ground up, you should prepare your clients for some pushback. Builders are going to probably want to have 100% oversight on the options selected, the colors selected, because the odds are they might get that home back and they want to sell it. They also want to protect the amount of overages and upgrades and features so that it doesn't push the appraised value. And so generally you see more builders want to use, they're fine with VA deals if they're specs, but they really don't like them if they're build jobs.
Yeah. So let's follow. So Lance, you're right, and glad you said it that way. I think if you look at the Dodd-Frank Act, you're going to find the details of this in that massive document, and it's going to allocate, restate, and allocate language to the losing of earnest money for low appraisals for borrowers who are under FHA or VA. And so when you have an act, you have a law. And so there isn't a way to contract around this. Now, look, you can get creative in other ways, I think, but FHA buyer agents, if I'm talking to you right now, you need that loan for a reason, probably because of credit score or various other things. They don't qualify for conventional. So you're chosen an FHA product and you find yourself in a competing situation. We're going to need to get creative about how to make that offer stronger, because the sellers are not going to want to do, and Lance is bringing a builder into it is a great example. Why am I going to pick a buyer who can just cancel because of low appraisal, leave me hanging and get all the deposits and earnest money back? Probably not going to do that. It's deep into the transaction and it leaves my seller hanging out. And now we're back on the market and they'll be surprised to hear there's nothing I can give them for their time off market.
Can I mention real quick? So this is for FHA and VA, but
Yep.
VA actually has an escape clause that can be filled out that lets them pay over appraised value if they choose to do that.
Okay, an escape clause if they choose to do it. They can't lose their earnest money though.
Meaning that they can pay over the appraised value. So their offer with that amendatory clause or whatever, it's fine. They can say, I'm fine paying up to 50,000 over. They just have to come with that money. The VA is not going to guarantee the extra 50,000. Obviously, they'll guarantee the appraised value or purchase price, whichever is lower.
Got it. Good.
Yeah, the buyer can pay more, but it doesn't. I've also seen situations where the buyer uses this a lower appraisal, even though they have every intention of wanting to buy the home and pay the 50 grand more, but they'll use it as leverage to renegotiate the price.
Yeah.
So again, if you're on the listing side, you've got to protect your client, which is why, I mean, I've said this 100 times throughout the years. I mean, I'll never build a custom home with any client of mine on a VA or FHA loan, period. End of discussion. Go find another builder. It's too hard to protect it. Unless a builder just wants to include it as part of their spec inventory, they're okay to get it back. They oversee the upgrades, the options, total different scenario. But spec home built standing, no problem. Love the loans, love the deals, and try to get them done. But yeah, I mean, I have obviously seen, I think we've all seen clients who love the home and maybe the appraisal comes in and it's only 5 grand off or something and they're totally fine to pay the difference. No big deal.
Yep. Well said.
Hey, you guys may have covered this while I was gone. If so, I apologize. Did you guys address where agents or buyer and seller want to negotiate to have non-refundable earnest money, even if the home did not appraise?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to be able to contract around that. I think that's our.
Yeah, my point is buyer and seller don't have the right to override what is a federal law.
Correct. Yes.
And so
Yep.
they may agree to it, but if the buyer wants their earnest money back and wanted to pursue it, I think that they would win.
Yeah, and that's back to you can't contract around laws. Enforceability it has to be lawful to be enforceable, and in that case, it isn't. And so now we end up with unintended consequences. Really, I think these rules get written to protect buyers, and in some cases with hot markets, it actually hurts the buyer because they're not able to win the bidding process. So. That's why they need us. There's all these complexities to this. So, okay, next, what else we got on the docket, Mike?
All right, we're going to talk about 10 ways to thrive in 2025.
Yeah. Okay, good. You want to pull that one up?
Mm-hmm.
Thought we would just highlight a few of these. 10 ways to thrive. This is. Oh, wow. You actually took my picture.
Yeah, I made it into a PDF and everything, Will.
Oh, did you? Okay, awesome. Well, all right, good. Well, there you go. Number 1, foster a positive mindset. So be careful about what you're saying to yourself. And be a calming influence. I think it's easy to throw gas on fires and getting upset. Being upset usually only compounds the problem, doesn't help solve the problem itself. Taking care of yourself and how you lower stress. I mentioned this the other day. You know that stress actually doesn't come from work. It never has. It actually comes from the work you're not doing. That's what's giving you stress. It's weighing on you. It's the things that are undone. That's pushing on you. So this is really speaks to time management and prioritizing and not trying to be everything to everybody all the time, but making your priorities those decisions yourself. Does everyone generally understand, Kristen? I would hope that you would nail this. Nicole too, probably. I'm seeing really quickly who's already probably mastered these. But do you feel like you know the 8 factors really well? Yes? Okay, good. It's a really good way to use the 8 factors when we're talking about monitoring the market. So I wanted to drop down to number 4. Be honest in estimating days on market and setting the proper expectation. When is a good time to tell the seller that we're going to study how the market responds and potentially have discussions about adjusting the price? When's the best time to do that?
I would say at the beginning.
Yeah, we don't want to have that happen when we've been on the market for 4 months and we have no offers and we're not getting the traffic and things. We want to have that discussion before we go active. This is back to the market's the opinion of value. The market has the best opinion of value, right? Not me, and it's more accurate than any other opinion. So let's really monitor how the market responds to our listing. And you can use the 8 factors in a way to do that. So your price competition, your location competition, your amenity competition, your feature competition. If you look at those 4 perspectives and monitor how the market's responding, you'll get a lot of clarity on whether or not you need a price adjustment and how much price adjustment you need, or whether you stay patient. Maybe stay patient. Maybe there's not enough data. Maybe not enough moving. I heard that argument in a really high price point. There's nothing really happening in 30 days, so there's no data to really report. So it's hard to make any determination. In other markets, it's different, and it's price, location, and your features and amenities. So this is a really good lens to look through, and it might help you set better expectations for your seller, and you're not the bad guy when it comes to these discussions. What was the other one, Mike, that you wanted to focus on?
Will, can I throw a comment in real quick?
Please.
Number 4
Please
on
do.
there, I think sometimes gets overlooked too much. It's just being honest when estimating days on market.
Yeah.
And what I find interesting with that is in the coaching manual, the same items I discussed with our St. George agents here a week and a half ago or so, pages like 100, 101. It's interesting because in some of the segments of our market, the number one thing that sellers want most from a real estate agent is help selling the market to a buyer. The number 2 thing, or sometimes the number 1 thing, is to help sell the home within a specific period of time.
Yeah.
So I think too often the time is what the time is, but helping our clients understand these segments of the market and the time it will take. But to give you an idea, if you're, according to our statistics, if you're 50, the age 50 or under, so that's definitely not Will Cooper. If it's 50 or under, the number 1 thing on their mind, number 1, all categories, all reasons why the seller hires you as a real estate agent is to help sell the home within a specific time frame. That is a big number. So don't forget about that. So in your marketing, in your social media marketing, in your marketing, talk about time on market. I sold this home in 30 days, 32 days. Average days on market in this neighborhood is 42. Sold it quicker than what the current market is showing. That's a really big deal. Again, number 1 item on sellers' minds when choosing an agent, time on market. We don't think that. We think it's reputation. And all those things weigh in and they matter. But according to our statistics and according to page 101 in your coaching manual, it's clearly outlines time on market is a very big deal. So make sure your marketing, your social media, what you're talking about in your listing presentations, use that as a piece of advice to your clients.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, I think sometimes we're getting tested too. Are you going to be honest or are we just going to be salesy? I think Like people are analyzing your answers, you're overselling, or are you being just honest? And I think at the end of the day, when they want to pick someone to represent them, they really need honesty, so really good point. And Lance, I identify as a more like 25-year-old. So
That's a totally different conversation, which I would dispute.
Okay. What's another one, Mike, that we wanted to highlight?
Are we talking 10 ways to thrive or the other subject?
Yeah, 10 ways to thrive. What was else was on here that we thought we needed to do?
Well,
Yeah.
we kind of touched on a little bit. Focus. Well, Lance did focus on the client's why. You touched that, and I undisputed there. Clients want they want some certainty surrounding their sales, so focus on their why. Shares of views report and other weekly activities. I feel like there's plenty of agents in our company who could use a refresher on our technology as well as the MLS to put together a views report. By the way, we have created a really good template in our resource center that you can just modify and do. It's a really good looking template, and you can insert the numbers and edit it to, Utah real estate views, our BHHS Utah number of views, and you can just edit it and provide updates that way when you share a views report. So you can share one concise report that looks really professional. The study market response after listing is active. If they're really pressed for time, I think it's really important to give a synopsis of your activity. How many showings you've had, even though that they're apprised of it, they're approving the showings. Maybe the first week or maybe the first or the second week, we say, hey, by the way, here's a update. I've had, X number of views. I've had this many requests for showings. I've received 3 inquiries via text messages from other agents. That helps them understand what's going on. And then also, if you're using Moxie, that's a great way to give them a study of what the market's doing, because that Moxie report is always live. And so we can refer back to it and analyze it ourselves and go, by the way, there's 2 more active listings, or, one of those listings we talked about during our presentation just went under contract. Moxie is a great way to study the market response after they have listed it, and just keep them apprised of what the market's doing.
Nice. I love that. Yeah, I think the whole industry needs to just do better. But look, Berkshire agents are pretty good, but we can always do better at really emphasizing the study of the market after we go on the active status. The down at the bottom, present solutions to problems. The reason that it sounds so like, of course I am. When you're following up in your prospecting, make sure you're not just checking in. There was something on their mind. There was something that you gathered last time that might be a concern or a worry or information or something like that. So go report back what you found, what you discovered, what you were thinking about their situation. That's a value add follow-up, which is always better received, and it progresses the process instead of just checking in and, hey, you guys, what are you thinking? About listing your house or purchasing something like that. So see if we can't solve problem. Solution-based follow-up is really what number 9 is about, solution-based follow-up. And that is how value is created. So we get lower commission objections there. 10 we already talked about. So really, really big key to improving your presentation is using forms to educate instead of present and sell. Just my goal is to educate. When I educate, I show complexity and problem, then I create value. So see if you can use those forms to do so. Okay, what was the next one?
All right, this one comes straight to us from un momentito. Let me get this back. Linda Larson. Linda has lost her voice, so she won't be participating. But apparently the UAR caravan was in Cedar City, and they spoke about sub-agency, when it happens, and its implications. And some agents allow other brokerages to hold open houses at their listings, or they themselves hold open houses for competing brokerage. Can you clarify Berkshire's position on this and why? So I think we've kind of come down on this. We've spoken about this in the past, but it's been a hot minute. There was a flurry. I think there was a trend there for a minute where this was becoming a little bit popular, and I do believe we shut this down pretty quick, didn't we, Will Cooper?
Yeah, I think guys, it's really about E&O and coverage. We just our policy is simply just going to say, well, that one's not on us then. And it's like it's not my ball. It's like it's not my monkey. Well, it's your monkey. Well, it's like we find ourselves with a really good chance that a claim is just not going to be paid. We also have a variety of different disclosures and authorizations from companies and owners and all of this that can be very problematic. Sub agency originally existed because sellers paid commissions, all agents represented them. And as long as you represent the seller, you are a sub agent of the seller. Um, that's why it was created. It's supposed to be a very limited group. When it expands outside the brokerage, it's very, very problematic. Is the broker also then a sub agent? Who else is a sub agent? Are they informed? Are they educated? And it can be a problem. But at the end of the day, absent of all the things that we could do to make that work, policy isn't going to cover anything. So that became like, well, that's too big of a weight on the scale. So it's not something that we advocate for. And look, there have been times where we've really tried to go to bat on this one. Big expensive listings like 15 million, $20 million listings, two owners, each have an agent that they want to employ. And we contemplated co-listing, co-broker, co-working, all of this. And at the end of the day, the E&O policy would not cover it. And I don't mean to minimize all the things that you'd have to do to make that work, which would just create other problems. So yeah, the simple answer is we just don't allow that. We hold open our own listings, our own company listings, our brokerage listings, and there's a lot to hold open. And so we encourage agents to do that. And we're happy to kind of show another agent's listing, of course, and another open house and participate in group open houses, which is a great idea, including other brokerages that want to be in those group open houses. But if we're going to show a property to another buyer, we're going to need a buyer broker to do that. So that's where we fall. Any other thoughts or comments on that? Rob, maybe you want to add in?
Yeah, I'll just add again without getting too much to the nuts and bolts that yes, the division said it's possible, which it is. It is legally, it can be done. But one of the things that you'd have to do, you literally would have to have co-listing agreement or co-buyer broker agreements with the parties. And not very many brokerages out there want to share their listings. And then they also have to store and have that broker has to have access to their files. So from the practicality side of things, brokerages don't want to give other companies access to their information. So in addition to the E&O not covering it from a practical standpoint, even if you just held an open house, and if I was with ABC Company and I'm showing Will's home with Berkshire, when I'm in the house, I'd have to also proactively say, hey, I'm not with Berkshire Hathaway, I'm on my own. To any potential buyer walking in the door, you'd have to almost have an advertisement that goes to show that you're not with the listing agent. So it just becomes a very transactional nightmare to try to facilitate it, even though it can be done. But no brokerage would want to, as a broker, I would never want to allow another company to have access to my files. It just wouldn't happen.
Let me also add keep in mind, I think most of us don't deal with sub-agency, but our developments do.
Yeah.
A lot of our projects in Park City and across the state, we identify in our listing, project listing with the developer, builder, owner, sub-agents of the listing, which would be team members, say at Promontory or whoever, so that an agency relationship actually is established.
Right.
We don't do that as much, I think, just because of We just don't follow the rules maybe quite to that level. If it's someone who's selling a few homes, and they're leaving town, a few new homes, and someone's leaving town for a week, and they have another agent in the office sit it, and that's where the problem lies, because
Well,
there is some understanding that the person in the model home probably represents the seller, and I think you would assume that the seller would anticipate that the agent in that office, even if it's a friend of the company or a friend of the listing agent, that they too be representing them, but technically they may not. I think that's where the problem lies as well, when you have listing agents of developments trying to represent both sides, and the complexities. That's a whole nother conversation, right? But there's a spin on that as well. Rob?
Yep.
yeah, and I was going to say what our contracts do have, both listing and buyer broker, they do allow for sub-agency within the brokerage.
Yeah.
So we have the automatic. So if, again, I'm going out of town and Will is going to be helping me with a particular client and I already have a buyer broker signed, Will would not need to go get a buyer broker agreement signed to show my buyer if we're in the same company. We have that sub-agency is already part of the contract that way, that allow us to share that agency relationship with another agent inside the company.
Yeah. 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 You would, there's some benefit really when you look at the model home agent and their team. There's a lot of benefits to that. That's why the developers kind of prefer it, because first of all, the seller is protected. They don't really have an incentive, guys, to represent any buyer. And frankly, it's almost impossible legally for a model agent to represent a buyer. It's not that's not going to happen. You have too much confidential information. So the structure of sub-agency inside of models and developments is actually very, very good. It's good for us, and it's good for our company, our builders, our clients. And then you've got the rest of the agents who deal with one-offs. And to Rob's point, we've got to be able to sub in and sub out sometimes. And we have ways to do that inside the brokerage. But the idea of doing that outside the brokerage, yeah, there's just too many problems with that. And a practical standpoint. And somebody might try to shortcut it and take their chances, like drive without a seatbelt. Like they might get to their destination. Like Rob, I liked what you said in the mandatory class. It's only a problem when it becomes a problem, right? I mean, you could have really bad contracts. You could have a lot of miles in that car without a seatbelt and never have a problem. It's only a problem when it is a problem. And comes a point where the likelihood of issues is too great, and so we have to just make a policy and say, we don't go down that road. But
Yeah, I think too. I'll just add one little bit here. I probably my guess is, Linda, that you've heard, maybe you have friends in other brokerages, and there are other brokerages who are, I have heard in the past, promoting this to their agents, like, go do this as go find every open house you can find, and that includes other brokerages, and let's get this done. And they've created their own paperwork to do it. That's not us.
Yeah, fortunately we have plenty of listings, to hold open. That matter of fact, everyone's already begging, "Hey, I'm looking for a host," and we have plenty of listings that are unheld open. So lots of opportunities there. Anything else? Wow, we're down to, that was a really quick hour. I can't believe how fast that went. Any other quick questions or comments or from anybody? No?
I think that's it. Well,
That's a wrap, huh? Okay. Well, hey, I would just tell you that we're going to have a really good meeting next week for our Wasatch Front Zoom meeting. I'll try to get out some teasers on that, but there's some really cool things to share for those who can attend. So we'll look forward to that. That's next on the agenda, and it's great. Well, I'm grateful for all of you. Thanks for joining us today. If I can help you in any way, I know Mike can, Lance can, Rob, Sharon, Jill, who's all on here. Who am I missing? Anybody else? But we're all happy to help you. So, and Dana, thank you for your comments and your assistance today. Appreciate all you guys do, making us look good and protecting us along the way. So have a